Hello, everyone. Today, I'll be discussing my research proposal and how my practice has developed so far. My research project is titled Without the Silver Spoon, Collaborative Making as Liberatory Memory Work for Colored Communities. My research is an art-based inquiry, and the theory that it makes use of calls for a nonlinear telling of how things have progressed so far. So I'll be speaking about my theoretical framework, my positionality as an art practitioner, the research design, as well as my ambitions for the project. I'm using the grounding metaphor of eating at a table to anchor us in working through that. The table, which is often used in philosophical musings, serves to ground us in a specific theory, namely new materialism, and the spoon as an interactive object, my hands as my practice and my methods as a researcher. And lastly, troublemaking at the table as a joyful vision for the project. My research question is, how could collaborative making act as liberatory memory work in assembling a community-based archive? How do those who participate experience this practice as meaningful and effective? This research aims to enact liberatory memory work within the colored community, using the spoon as a material marker by engaging in generative art-based modes of collaboration. In order to achieve these aims, I have outlined the following objectives: to explore and investigate the spoon as a material marker within colored communities through engaging with archival and autoethnographic research, to explore and investigate others' experiences of the spoon as a material marker within colored communities through arts-based making workshops, to develop an experimental, intergenerational, post-custodial archive of spoons in relation to colored identity formation, and lastly, to assess the impact and effectiveness of the work produced in order to ascertain the value of collaborative making within liberatory memory work. So let's go to the table. I tended to my research and the archives looking for answers about my identity, my social responsibility as a designer, and my approach as an art practitioner. Before I knew it, I had too many questions and like 5 proposals. And thankfully, I'm not the first person to have asked most of those questions. I found kinship in the questions and positionality of Sarah Ahmed, a mixed race queer woman with a background of many migrations. She asks, at what point does the world unfold? More specifically, at what point does her world unfold? She locates herself at the table. Ahmed's scholarship forms part of an emergent theoretical framework called critical feminist new materialism. It involves a turn to matter. This turn is informed by a convergence of post-structuralist, feminist, post-colonialist, and queer theory that rejects the economic and structural determinism of Marxism as sufficient to underpin struggles for social justice. Rather, new materialists understand the world and history to be produced by a range of forces: physical, biological, psychological, social, and cultural. The materiality concerned is plural, open, complex, uneven, and contingent. This framework asserts that the materiality of the world should be understood through a flat relational ontology. Bodies, animate organisms, material things, environments, space, and time can all be understood as matter. The dichotomies between natural and cultural realms are collapsed, as well as the dualisms of structure and agency, reason and emotion, animate and inanimate, human and non-human, and mind and matter. Instead of striving for universalism in doing this, this flattening opens up scholarship to multiplicity. So now I'm looking at the spoon. My world unfolds from spoons. Spoons arrived as vibrant matter to me through my own personal lack of familial archive. Given the nature of my parents' interracial marriage in 1991, their bonds with relatives deteriorated. 3 of my grandparents passed away before I was 6 months old. My grandfather passed away once we had emigrated to Ireland. As a biracial child growing up with the added complexity of being a third culture kid, heritage and culture have always been a question mark. However, despite several passages of migrations, certain things kept me in a tangle with my history, my inheritance. Not literally, we have no money. My parents' artworks and furniture, our Muslim faith, and the attendant rituals of food that accompanied it. Whilst reckoning with questions of identity and belonging, I found myself stunned by that spoon. That one silver spoon with floral embossing that seems to be ubiquitous in the South African cutlery drawer. A spoon that journeyed through continents with my family, held the contents of my white Afrikaans mother's assimilatory process of learning Cape Malay cooking. A relational object, hand to mouth. A reflective object, containing the world in a mirrored shell. A reflexive object, me, those before me, and the world that shaped our existence. We emigrated to Ireland when I was 2 years old. My dad left the Boer Cup behind his home for most of his life. We pieced together culture, home, family, around platefuls of food. In Europe, we picked up utensils to eat at the table, as opposed to the handfuls we were used to serving ourselves with. Colored identity formation within post-apartheid South Africa remains a contested issue. Historical marginalization and its continued perpetuation remains a crucial factor within that. Erasmus argues that colored identity should not be conceptualized within the limited scope of racial identifiers as a race mixture, but rather seen as a manifestation of cultural creativity, creolized formation shaped by South Africa's history of colonialism, slavery, and apartheid. Conradi notes how scholarship on this topic has largely omitted the relevance of material culture. There is a need for colored communities to find self-recognition in a way that offers them agency outside of the racial violence and logic imposed by settler colonialism and apartheid. Coulthard proposes that liberation for minoritized communities necessitates cultural practices of critical individual and collective self-recognition that colonized populations often engage in to empower themselves, instead of relying too heavily on the colonial state to do this for them. Caswell proposes that some of this work can be achieved through liberatory memory work within community-based archives. I believe this assessment to be correct and useful within the context outlined above. It is in this interdisciplinary space where I hold onto my spoon. I want to situate my work at the intersections of material culture, cultural studies, critical design, and archival practice. Critical design, employed through collaborative making, has the capacity to engage with material details as place markers for colored people in the Cape. These exploratory insights could add value to the scope of transformative archival practice, compiling an inventory of memory that exists, at least in its creativity and speculation, outside of the confines of the borders of racial difference. The hands. Liberatory memory work originates from a 2014 report for the Nelson Mandela Foundation, written by Chandra Gold and Vern Harris, to encapsulate a range of memory practices aiming to prevent recurring systemic injustice in post-conflict societies. The aim is to release societies from cycles of violence, and instead to create vibrant and conscious societies that strive to achieve a just balance of individual and collective rights. In Urgent Archives, enacting liberatory memory work, Michelle Caswell argues that records should be activated for the aims of temporal autonomy, self-recognition, and ultimately redistribution of resources. These aims inform the structure of the book. Within the first chapter, she identifies how dominant Western archival theory consists of linear progress narratives that form part of a white temporal imaginary. Even cyclical conceptions of time in non-Western cultures, as well as the recursive nature of marginalization and violence under settler colonialism, she agrees that an insistence on linear progress is a form of chronoviolence within the archive. Following this, the second chapter explores how community-based archives have challenged dominant archival temporalities through case studies. In her research, she identifies that minoritized communities felt as if issues of historic trauma remain unresolved and are experiencing repetitions of oppression, an afterlife of violence. She posits community archives and the activism they generate as attempts to intercept chronoviolence. In the third chapter, she demonstrates how a case study leveraged representational and recuperative collecting as a form of liberatory appraisal for contemporary political activism, what she calls liberatory activism. Caswell warns against hope as a solution for oppression, arguing that it operates within white temporality. Instead, she opts for disrupting in the now and finding the joy in doing the troublemaking. Tim Ingold posits that making is a way of knowing from the inside. Making engages with the meshwork, or to use a new materialist term, the entanglement of life in which one takes a thread to take it further. With this understanding of being as doing and making as mattering, I undertook my creative practice. My recent degree and honors in illustration influenced my approach. I tried to articulate the interrelations I saw in my research, weaving the table, the spoon, and the hand together in different ways using drawings. Each drawing rests on a circular surface, mimicking the form of a spoon, of a plate, and of a round table. Following this, I undertook an autoethnographic survey of my spoons. So there you can see some of the illustrations that I made, and I incorporated them into later iterations of posters. Those are my illustrations. And then after that, I started trying to archive the spoons that I found in my own household. And it was quite an interesting manifestation of what things had been pointing me towards. So I asked my mom and dad for their spoons, and my mom, given her like Afrikaans heritage, she had like boxes of like perfectly non-used like silverware, and my dad had no spoons, which makes sense given cultural practices and gender dynamics, but it was just interesting to see the way that matter and spoons mattered and interacted back with me and my family's history and was representational of that. And then in scanning in those spoons, I came across a happy accident where I started warping the spoons, and it kind of spoke to the temporality and the entanglement that I've been trying to articulate through my work. And then following that, I developed a series of 3 posters. And while I was making these posters and playing with scanning and playing with the illustrations, 3 different phrases came to me, and they really were catalytic phrases in terms of thinking through and making through what I've been thinking with. So the first phrase is handheld memory. The next phrase is heirloom leftovers. And the last one is spoon-fed identity. And through this process, you can see how I've incorporated the different material explorations with the spoon, with the illustrations. I would scan the illustrations. In the center one, I scanned the illustrations with the recipe book with the spoon, and I was really trying to make those interactions visible. So troublemaking at the table. So which table, spoons, and hands do I want to make trouble with? Research design within new materialist social inquiry looks radically different from the traditional model of research design, and it consists instead of an assemblage of processes that are fluid and dynamic. This correlates with the nature of art-based inquiry, as well as collaborative making, which are circular and generative processes that incorporate feedback into a process of iterations. Beyond my personal artistic practice, my research will engage with mixed qualitative research methods, further autoethnographic exploration, as well as a focus group of 5 participants who are inhabitants from the Burkop area. And then I contextualized the Burkop area. So the Burkop, formerly known as the Malay Quarter, is a former racially segregated area in the city center of Cape Town and a historical center of the Cape Malay culture in Cape Town. The history of the Burkop reflects the political processes in South Africa during the apartheid years. The area was declared an exclusively residential area for Cape Muslims under the Group Areas Act of 1950, and people of other religions and ethnicity were forced to leave. It is the oldest surviving residential neighborhood in Cape Town with multicultural inhabitants and its population consisting of 57% Muslims. It's also a community or an area that's under threat as it's really lucrative property in the city, and it has become increasingly gentrified. And so in thinking through the idea of urgent archives, it's an urgent site that needs to be archived. So the collaborative making undertaken in the focus group will form the basis of a community-based alternative archive. I aim to recruit participants through voluntary response sampling, but would like the group to ideally be able to stimulate intergenerational dialogue. From the 3 catalytic prompts outlined in my posters, the desires, No, I aim to draw open questions for discussion within the focus group. The desires and limitations of the group will determine the outcome and number of sessions. Together, we will sit around the table and make with, about, and through spoons. The outcome will be mutually determined. In working with participants, there are several ethical considerations that are necessary. Firstly, I must be aware of my positionality and display self-reflexivity and continually interrogating my biases towards a preferred outcome. Within the focus group and in the nature of embodying a flat relational ontology, my role as a designer and researcher is that of co-creator and not leader. The participants will have informed consent throughout the process and an understanding of how the work will be used. Continuous feedback will ensure that the outcome serves the participants' needs for liberatory memory work and what a community-based archive could mean or not mean for them. I started this process with too many questions and I still have many left, but through the generative process of making, through tracing my inheritance, through looking towards what I want to achieve by re-entangling with the past and with matter, I realized that the best part of sharing a meal is the discussion. So I look forward to continuing this one around the table with the spoon, with our hands, making trouble. Thank you.